Hi, I'm Geoffrey. Welcome back to Nightfalls. Come, settle in for tonight's calming meditation and soothing bedtime story. As always, don't worry if you fall asleep before the end. You can drift off whenever you're ready. Come, get settled by the fireside, and I'll tell you a tale I never grow tired of. Growing up in Scotland, I have heard the tale of the Loch Ness monster more times than I can count. And as a boy, I felt quite sure I had in fact caught sight of her tail a good few times too. Tonight we follow William and his grandfather, who were lucky enough to meet Nessie one quiet day by the loch. Before we begin, here's a quick word from our valued sponsors who make this free content possible. For the best way to fall asleep with Nightfalls, you can now become a premium supporter. Enjoy the entire back catalogue of Nightfalls classics, all with a rich, immersive, and totally ad-free experience. If you love falling asleep to Nightfalls, Nightfalls Premium will elevate your sleep while helping to support myself and the team. We love creating Nightfalls, but without supporters, it wouldn't be possible. Join Nightfalls Premium today in just 2 taps on both Apple Podcasts or via the Supercast link found in the show notes for all other podcast players. Your sleep will thank you for it, and so will I.
Hello, Abby here. If you've got children and find bedtime's a struggle, I'd like to tell you about Coco Sleep, a children's story podcast designed to make bedtime a dream. Coco Sleep turns a chaotic bedtime into cozy bonding time. The stories are delivered in a pace that gently slows. Rumour has it that no one's ever heard an ending. So search Coco Sleep on your favourite podcast app and let's make bedtime a dream. That's KOKO Sleep, and I'll see you there.
Before I tell you tonight's tale, perhaps you might like to take a moment to wind down. I hope you don't mind if I join you. I'm feeling rather in the mood for a little relaxation this evening. Stretch out and come to a comfortable position, just as I am, and draw a deep breath in with me. As you exhale, allow the stress and strain of another long day to drain from your body. Breathing in, give the full weight of your head to the soft cushions beneath you. Exhaling, release your neck and shoulders. Breathing in deeply, allow your lungs to open up. As you exhale, perhaps you too notice that there's a little extra space within you now. Join me as I breathe into that space and exhale, allowing the weight of another long day to drift from your body on the gentle tide of your breath. Perhaps you noticed the natural deepening of your breath as you inhale. I'd encourage you to lean into it and allow your breath to drift deeper before you exhale once more. Breathe in deep, and as you exhale, feel your lungs and the muscles of your abdomen relaxing and releasing. Breathe in to stretch out your core and create space within. And exhale to feel those muscles release as your breath fans out over your bottom lip. I always find that taking a little time to breathe slows my mind and helps me to wind down. I feel just the same about a good story too. So if you're feeling relaxed, let me tell you tonight's tale. I was 7 years old when I first visited the Loch Ness in Scotland. It was 1950, and I recall how the weather was unseasonably warm for April, so much so that it felt like the height of summer. It was also the day when I met the Loch Ness monster. It was my granddad Ernie who took me to the loch that day. His full name was Ernest, but anyone who knew him called him Ernie. With a twinkle in his eyes and a merry smile on his face, he could make the greyest day seem full of sunshine and adventure. As we approached the loch on that sunny day, it looked like a blue jewel as it lay beneath the undulating hills that framed it like one would a work of art. The sky was free from clouds, apart from a few wisps of low-lying mists which wreathed the mountains. Despite the glorious weather, there weren't many visitors to the loch that day, which surprised Grandad. He told me how tourists to the area had increased since the A82 had been built in 1933. I had no idea what the A82 was at the time, but I nodded, as if I did. We set off walking along the shoreline. The water lapped gently a few inches from our feet. We paused now and again to watch the reflections of the birds soaring high above us, dancing across the water. At one point on our stroll, Grandad told me to look closer at the water. When I did, I was delighted to see small fish darting between the rocks, as if they were playing a chasing game. We walked on in companionable silence for a while longer, enjoying the feel of warm sun on our backs. A short while later, Grandad stopped walking and pointed to the middle of the loch. He said, "Look, William, can you see those creatures over there? They're dragonflies. See how they're skimming the water's surface? It's unusual to see them at this time of year. The twinkle in his eyes intensified as he added, "There must be magic in the air today. Maybe we'll get lucky and see Nessie." His words caused butterflies of hope to take up a merry jig in my tummy. A smile spread across my face as I thought how amazing it would be if that happened. I'd heard about the legend of the Loch Ness monster at school. My teacher told the class that many people had claimed to see her, but no one had any solid evidence to prove her existence. A blurry photograph had been taken sometime in the 1930s. Grandad showed me it in an old newspaper he had. Even though I could only make out a blurry long neck and head, I knew in my heart that the creature in the photograph was indeed Nessie. I was convinced she was real and that she lived in Loch Ness. I never, ever dreamed that I'd get to meet her. As Grandad and I continued walking along the shoreline, we noticed a change in the atmosphere. The sky turned a brighter blue, and the air seemed fresher. A breeze brought the scent of flowers to us, even though there weren't any flowers nearby. It was at this point that Grandad stopped walking. He indicated for me to do the same. He put his hand on the back of his neck and said, "Something's going to happen, William. Something important. I can feel it here." He rubbed his neck. No sooner had he spoken when the water in the middle of the loch rippled outwards. We both stared at it. As we watched, even bigger ripples circled outwards. All of a sudden, a head slowly appeared within the ripples. The head rose higher and higher, supported by a slender neck. It looked just like that old black and white photograph. Taking a closer look, I saw the creature's skin was emerald green, with darker green scales running up and down its neck. With his voice barely above a whisper, Grandad said, "William, it's Nessie. It's really her." Nessie gracefully rotated in the water until she was facing us. She had big green eyes and a little nose. She moved smoothly through the water as she came towards us. She came so close that I could see a glint of joy in her eyes. It was the same twinkle that Grandad often had in his eyes. I waved at Nessie. In return, she winked at us before turning away and gliding back through the water. She looked back at us and winked again. I pulled on Grandad's jacket and said, "She wants us to follow her." Come on. Grandad wasn't sure about that, but I persuaded him with all the charm that a 7-year-old boy possesses. The dragonflies, which we had seen earlier, fluttered and flittered behind Nessie as she swam regally towards the far end of the loch. A couple of frogs creaked a greeting to her, and overhead, birds let out cheerful tweets. The sun's rays glittered off the small ripples which Nessie was making. The only humans were Grandad and me. I had an excited feeling in my tummy, like something even more magical was going to happen. Nessie reached the end of the loch and stopped. She tipped her head to one side, as if she was waiting for something. The water ahead of her began to churn up. It reminded me of when Mum ran a bubble bath for me. She would swish her hands back and forth through the water to make as many bubbles as she could. The water churned up even more until small waves of white foam appeared. Then, out of the foam, 2 white horses became visible. They cantered through the waves and headed towards us. In astonishment, I looked at Grandad. He was shaking his head slowly and blinking, as if he couldn't believe what was happening. The horses jumped from the water and came to our side. They lifted their heads, shook their manes, and promptly changed into men with long, flowing white hair. Grandad's mouth kept opening and closing, as if he were trying to speak, but no words came from him. One of the men knelt next to me and gave me a kind look. His voice was as deep as thunder as he said, "Do not be afraid, little one. My name is Kylan. I'm a Kelpie, a water spirit. I can take many forms, but I prefer the shape of a horse. My friend and I have been guarding Nessie for centuries. She sometimes appears to humans who have hearts full of joy and wonder. Would you like to meet her? I know she'd like to meet you." I looked at Grandad with a big smile on his face. He gave me a nod. Kylan and his friend, who was called Robin, changed back into white horses. They lowered their backs and told Grandad and me to climb on. We did so and shared a little grin, as if riding on magical creatures was something we did every day. I held onto Kylan's mane as he trotted back into the water. He lightly ran on the surface of the water, as if it were solid ground. Nessie's eyes shone more brightly as we approached. She bowed her head slightly at us and said, "I'm delighted to meet you both. Follow me, and I'll take you to a special place. It's a cave, quite unlike any you've seen before. How does that sound? My grandfather and I didn't manage any words, but both nodded and smiled in nervous agreement. She turned and began to glide through the mirror-like loch. Her Kelpie guards followed along in her wake, the frothy churn of the water splashing against their hooves as they galloped over its surface. A cloud hung overhead, shimmering and hazy, which neither I nor my grandfather had noticed earlier. This didn't seem strange at the time. Whilst galloping across water on the back of a Kelpie, all of our usual logic seemed no longer to apply. The cloud lowered towards the water, its mist twisting and twirling and expanding in our path. Nessie lowered her neck gracefully and glided into obscurity. The soft mist soon hung a few feet in front of us. Before I knew it, we were moving through the mist, and I was surprised at how warm it felt on my skin as I travelled through it. Within seconds, the mist melted away. As I looked around us, I could see we weren't on Loch Ness anymore. I wasn't even sure we were still in Scotland. I was still riding on the white horse, but the water beneath us had been replaced with lush, green grass, which was dotted with bright yellow flowers. The mountains had gone. In their place were groups of blossom-laden trees. Nessie was walking ahead of us on 4 sturdy legs. She had a long tail which swished happily from side to side. She looked a bit like a dinosaur from one of my picture books. Nessie turned around and waited for us to reach her. When we did, the Kelpies lowered their backs to allow Grandad and me to climb off. When we'd done so, the Kelpies bowed in farewell before leaving us. I knew it was rude to stare, but I couldn't help it. Nessie was magnificent. She towered above us. I was no good at guessing heights, but later on, Grandad described her as being as tall as 2 double-decker buses. Her emerald skin twinkled in the sunlight, as if embedded with sparkling crystals. The smile on her face was warm and full of kindness. She must have seen the wonderment on our faces, because she asked if we had any questions for her. Grandad's mouth opened and closed again, with no sound coming out. I asked Nessie if she was a dinosaur. She let out a melody of a laugh, which made me laugh too. She said she wasn't a dinosaur, but she was an ancient creature who had graced this land for time immemorial. I didn't know what immemorial meant, but I nodded, as if I did. I asked Nessie one question after another. Being a child, I asked her what she ate, where she slept, and how old she was when she learned to swim. With a chuckle in her voice, she answered my questions. By this time, Grandad had found his voice, and he asked Nessie where her secret cave was. The cave is right in front of us. She turned around and moved forward. I noticed a disturbance in the air ahead of us. It was like one of those shimmering heat hazes which you might see on a hot day. As I focused on it more, the entrance to a large cave appeared. I pointed it out to Grandad. He shrugged nonchalantly, as if caves appeared out of thin air all the time. Nessie ducked her head a little as she entered the cave. We were right behind her. The ceiling inside the cave was high, and Nessie raised her head as if stretching out her neck muscles. Tiny sparkling stones glimmered from the ceiling like twinkling stars. The ground beneath our feet was made of soft sand. There were simple paintings on the walls of the cave, some of them depicting Nessie in all her beauty. An echo of a song came floating on the cool air. I stepped in Nessie's enormous footprints as we walked through the cave and into a tunnel. The song increased in volume as we ventured further. Before too long, we reached the end of the tunnel. The scene which met us stopped Grandad and me in our tracks. A brilliantly blue lagoon laid in front of us. I'd never seen such a clear blue before, and I've never seen one since. It was like the water had been illuminated from beneath. Even though the ceiling was high above us, the reflection of the moving water cast blue-tinged reflections weaving over it. There were a dozen or so mermaids swimming in the lagoon. I knew they were mermaids because their tails occasionally flipped out of the water before promptly disappearing again. Some of the mermaids were resting at the side of the lagoon. They looked our way and gave us friendly waves. Without any hesitation, I waved back. There were some other creatures sitting on the sand at the side of the water. I didn't recognize them from many of my picture books. I tried not to stare at their silvery skins. Nessie led us over to the lagoon and introduced us. I don't know how she knew our names, but knowing she did made me feel important and special. The creatures with silvery skins told us they were Selkies. They explained how they turned into seals when they were in the water. But once on dry land, they returned to their human forms. The Selkies offered us food and drink in the form of seaweed cakes and crystal clear water from a nearby waterfall. I wasn't too sure about eating the cakes, but after taking a few tentative bites, I was delighted to find they were utterly delicious. Nessie settled herself into a sitting position at our sides and looked as if she were about to say something. As if sensing her forthcoming words, the swimming mermaids moved closer to us and rested their elbows on the edge of the lagoon. The Selkies moved a bit closer to Nessie and waited for her to speak. But Nessie didn't speak. Instead, she sang. In her lovely, lilting voice, she sang a song about her life. How she first came to Scotland when creatures of the sea were starting to develop legs and move over land. How those creatures changed and adapted throughout the centuries, becoming braver and more adventurous. She sang about the creatures who took to the skies and other ones who eventually returned to the sea. She told us of enchanted beings who kept away from human eyes. The Kelpies and Selkies, the mer people and the fairies and the unicorns and dragons. My eyes grew as wide as saucers as I listened to her enchanting tale. Grandad looked as if he didn't quite believe her words. But I did. I imagined Nessie meeting every single creature and having a friendly chat with them. And I pictured myself right at her side and thought how lovely it would be to meet a dragon. Nessie's tone turned merry as she sang about the first human inhabitants came to live at the loch. How the early ones loved seeing her and would paint pictures of Nessie on their cave walls. How others would sing about her and give her gifts of food and lavish her with garlands made from sweet-smelling flowers. As her song concluded, the mermaids came out of the water, their tails now replaced with legs. With a bow at each other, they held hands as they performed an elegant dance around Nessie. When they'd finished, the Selkies got to their feet and entertained us with a jolly jig. They held out their hands to Grandad and me, and soon we were dancing around the lagoon with the laughing creatures. The mermaids took up the singing next and sang about their aquatic journeys through the seas of the world and the wonders they'd seen. Their voices were low and warm, and I felt my eyes growing heavy. I moved closer to Grandad and rested against him. The Selkies entertained us with a tune next. Their sweet voices told us a tale about one of their kind who'd left her Selkie self behind when she'd fallen in love with a shepherd. As much as she loved the shepherd, she yearned to be back in the water. The shepherd loved her so much that he agreed to give up his human form. The love-struck pair then continued their life together as Selkies. I noticed Grandad wiping a tear away as the song concluded. I was struggling to stay awake at this point, and I heard Grandad tell Nessie it was time for us to return home. My eyes refused to stay open, and I gently closed them. I felt myself being lifted and placed down somewhere. Through a half-open eye, I saw that I was on Nessie's back. Grandad climbed on behind me and wrapped his arms around me. With a tired wave at the mermaids and Selkies, we left the lagoon, travelled back through the tunnel, and came out of the cave. I forced my eyes open and was met with a magnificent view of the night sky. The velvety darkness was littered with thousands of bright stars. The full moon looked enormous as it took center stage in the celestial scene. Nessie took us towards a sheet of mist which hung over the meadow like a shimmering curtain. As we went through it, I felt my eyes closing again. I must have nodded off for a while, because when I opened my eyes again, I found myself in Grandad's arms. We were back on the shoreline at the side of the loch. Looking upwards, I noticed the stars weren't as plentiful at this side of the magical mist, nor was the moon as full. But still, the night sky was a welcome sight for a tired young boy. Nessie was in the water a short distance away from us. The twinkle in her eyes was brighter than any star. She dipped her head in farewell before lowering herself into the dark water and disappearing from view. I snuggled close to Grandad's chest and asked if I'd dreamt the whole thing. He stroked my head and said, "William, if you dreamt it, then so did I. Let's not tell anyone about this. No one would ever believe us." As I fell asleep that night in my cozy bed, My dreams were full of the day I'd met the Loch Ness monster. On an unseasonably warm day in April 1950.